For 3 years I kept a chair empty on purpose, and I would have kept it empty until they buried me. Most folks understood. The regulars at the Bluebird had watched my wife Ruth and me take the same corner booth every morning for the better part of 40 years, and when she passed, they let me have the booth to myself without anyone ever saying a word about it. I would come in at 7:15, sit on my side, and set Ruth's chipped blue mug across from me on her side. I never filled it. I just set it down where it had always sat, the handle turned toward where her hand would have been. And then I drank my own coffee and read the paper, and pretended I was not the loneliest man in the state of Maine. The mug was nothing special. It was the kind they used to give away at the hardware store, a dull robin's egg blue with a chip out of the rim that Ruth claimed made the coffee taste better. When she got sick, I started bringing it from home, and Sal, who owns the diner, never once asked me why. He just left an empty spot for it and stopped trying to clear it. That was the arrangement. The whole town let an old man have his quiet grief, and the quiet grief let the old man keep breathing, one gray morning at a time. It was a gray morning, the kind we get in the off-season when the tourists are gone and the harbor goes the color of a nickel, when she walked in. She was young, maybe in her middle 20s, in a thin coat that was no match for our wind, with a duffel bag over one shoulder like she had come a long way and was not sure where she was going next. The diner was full that day. The fishing boats were in, and Dot was running plates 2 at a time. And there was not a free seat in the place, except for the 3 I was guarding with a dead woman's coffee cup. I felt her stop at my booth before I looked up. People did that sometimes, newcomers who didn't know the rules, and I had a look I gave them, a flat, tired look that sent them somewhere else. I had perfected that look. I gave it to her. "This seat taken?" she asked. I meant to say yes. I had said yes to that question 100 times. I opened my mouth to say it, and what came out was nothing at all. And while I sat there with my mouth not quite working, she slid into the bench across from me, set her duffel down by her feet, looked at the blue mug, looked at me, and smiled like she had been coming here her whole life. I did not sleep right that night. I told myself it was the coffee. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that. I was sure, in the way that lonely old men are sure of things, that she wanted something from me. You hear about it. They prey on the ones who eat alone, the widowers and the widows, the ones with paid-off houses and nobody left to ask where the money went. So I was cold to her. I answered in single words. I kept my wallet in my front pocket and my eyes on my paper, and I waited for her to make her play. She never made it. She would order the cheapest thing on the menu, 2 eggs and toast, and she would pay for it with quarters and dimes she counted out of a coin purse, and she would talk. Not at me exactly, just out loud, the way a person talks when they have been alone too long and the silence has started to hurt. She talked about the harbor and the gulls and how the light came in off the water. She asked Dot about her grandkids and remembered their names the next day. She never once asked me for a dime. What broke me was a Tuesday. I got up to leave, the way I always did, dropped my bills on the table and started for the door. And she said, quiet, not making a thing of it, "Mister, your pills." I had left the little brown bottle on the seat. The heart medicine I am supposed to take with food and am too proud to take in front of anyone. Ruth used to slide it across to me every morning without a word, so I never had to feel like an old man taking it. I had been forgetting it for 3 years, finding it at home at night, going without. This girl saw it on the vinyl and held it out to me with both hands like it mattered. "Thank you," I said, the first soft thing I had said to her. She nodded. "I'm June," she said. "Walter," I said, and I sat back down. That was the first crack in a wall I had spent 3 years building, and I want to be honest, it scared me worse than anything had since the funeral. We started talking after that, real talking, in halves and pieces, the way 2 careful people do. She gave me her story first, and she gave it to me plain, no tears, which is how I knew it was true. Her mother had died that spring. Cancer fast, the kind that doesn't give you time to get used to the idea. There was no father in the picture, never had been. No brothers, no sisters, no aunts who returned a phone call. She had been working shifts at a warehouse 3 states south, and when her mother went, June found she had exactly nobody, and exactly nothing keeping her in that town. So she had packed a duffel and started driving north with a half-formed idea in her head that she would not tell me yet. "You can't just drive around forever," I said. "I know," she said, "but I had to come this way first. There's something I needed to find." I let it go. I had my own things I didn't say out loud. But she was patient, the way Ruth had been patient, and over a couple of weeks she drew it out of me without ever seeming to pull. How Ruth and I had wanted children and never had them. How the doctors gave us reasons and then stopped giving us reasons, and how we made our peace with it by deciding the two of us would be enough, and we truly were, for 40 years. How the trouble with being enough for one person is that when they're gone there is nothing left over. No grandchildren to call, no son to drive up at Christmas, just a house full of her things and a blue mug I carried back and forth like a fool. "That's why the empty chair," June said. "It wasn't a question." "That's why," I said. "I still talk to her in my head. I tell her about the weather. The chair helps. It's not crazy." "It's not crazy," she agreed. I should tell you what the town was saying by then because it matters for later. They were saying she was working me. A young woman, a lonely widower, sitting together every morning, his blue mug on the table between them. I heard it from Earl, who fished alongside me for 30 years and figured he had earned the right to say hard things. "You watch yourself, Walt," he told me out on the dock. "Girl like that doesn't sit with a man like you for the conversation." I told him to mind his own lines. But it got into me, the way poison does, and I am not proud of the morning I asked June flat out what she really wanted from me. She looked at me a long moment. Then she said, "A reason to keep driving in the morning, same as you." And she picked up her fork and ate her eggs, and I felt about 2 inches tall, and I never asked her again. The mornings got lighter after that. Not the sky, the mornings. There is a difference. I found I was waiting for them again instead of just getting through them. June had a way of turning an ordinary Tuesday into something. She got me talking about the years I spent teaching high school shop, the woodwork and the small engines, the kids who couldn't sit still for a book but came alive with a tool in their hands. And one day she pointed at the jukebox in the corner, the old Wurlitzer that had been dead and dark since before Sal bought the place, and she said, "Bet a shop teacher could fix that." "Bet a shop teacher could," I said, "if a shop teacher felt like it." It took me 3 afternoons. Sal cleared a table and let me spread the guts of that machine across it, and June handed me tools and held the flashlight and asked 100 questions, and the regulars wandered over to watch. And for the first time in 3 years, I was the man in the room who knew how to do something. When the motor finally caught and the record dropped and the music came up out of that old box, the whole diner went quiet. Then everybody clapped, and Dot wiped her eyes on her apron and pretended she hadn't. The song that came up, the first one in the slot, was an old one, Ruth's song. I won't tell you the name because it doesn't belong to this story, it belongs to her, but I knew it inside of 2 notes and I had to grip the edge of that table to stay standing. June didn't know what it was. She just saw my face and came and stood next to me and didn't say a thing, and we listened to it all the way through. When it ended, I said, "That was Ruth's." And June said, "Then I'm glad it's the first one that plays in here from now on." And it was. Every morning after, somebody dropped a coin and played Ruth's song, and the diner let me have that the same way it had let me have the empty chair. I was happy. I want that on the record. After 3 years of just surviving, an old man was happy again, and the reason was a girl from nowhere who counted out her breakfast in dimes. Which is, of course, exactly when the trouble came. It came in a gray suit and a leased car. His name was Marcus Vale, and he was a regional something or other for a development company out of the city, and he came into the Bluebird one morning not to eat but to inform us. He had papers. The block was being sold. The whole strip, the diner and the bait shop and the empty storefront beside it, was coming down to put up condominiums with a water view, and Sal's lease, it turned out, had a clause in it that Sal had never read closely, and the long and short of it was that the Bluebird had until the end of the season, and then it was finished. 60-some years it had stood there. Vale laid it out like he was doing us a kindness, like we ought to thank him for the warning. I have buried my wife and I have lost a great many things, but I want to tell you that I did not understand how hard that one would hit me until I sat there in the booth with the papers on the table, because that diner was not a diner to me. It was the last room in the world that still had Ruth in it. We were married out of that booth, near enough. We celebrated 40 anniversaries in it. The corner where I sat still had the same window she used to watch the boats from. They were not knocking down a restaurant. They were knocking down the last place I could still find her, and I think Vale saw it on my face because he looked at me, and then he looked at June, and he said something I won't forget. "And you'd be the granddaughter," he said, with a little smile that wasn't a smile. "Or whatever you are, must be worth your while sitting with the old-timer. Be a shame if there's nothing left to inherit but a torn-down lot." June went white, not angry white, hurt white. And I understood in that second that the whole town had been thinking what Vale just said out loud, and that she had known it the whole time and had kept coming anyway. She stood up so fast her coin purse spilled across the table, dimes and quarters rolling everywhere, and she said, "I never took a thing from this man in my life." And she walked out into the wind without her duffel. I sat there with Vale's papers and Ruth's blue mug and a tableful of scattered change, and I made a decision. Two of them, actually. The first was that I was too old to be afraid of looking like a fool. The second was that nobody was knocking down my wife's window without a fight. I'm not a man who organizes things. Ruth did that for 40 years and I let her, but I found I remembered how. I started with Earl on the dock, the same Earl who'd warned me about June, and I told him about the diner, and I told him the truth about June too, the part I knew, which was that she had never once asked me for anything, and I told him I was ashamed of both of us for thinking otherwise. Earl chewed on that and then he said, "What do you need, Walt?" And we were off. We packed the next town meeting. I had not been to one since Ruth died, and the room actually quieted when I came in, this old ghost who only ever sat in a booth, standing up to speak. Sal came with his lease and a lawyer's letter we'd scraped together money for. Dot brought a petition with 300 names on it because it turns out a diner waitress knows everybody. Earl brought the whole fleet, men who smelled of diesel and didn't say much but filled the back of the room like a wall. And I stood up and I told them what I have told you, that some buildings are just buildings, and some are the last place a person can go to be with somebody they lost, and that the Bluebird was the second kind for more people in that town than just me. I wasn't smooth about it, but I meant every word, and you can hear when a man means it. That should have been the climax of the thing, and it nearly was. But then June stood up in the back of the room where I hadn't even known she was, and she asked if she could say something, and the room got that uneasy quiet again because they all knew the story Vale had been spreading. She walked up to the front. She was shaking, and she said, "Most of you think you know why I'm here. You think I came for his money. I'm going to tell you why I really came, and then you can think whatever you want." She turned to me. "My mother's name was Maggie," she said. "When she was 16, she ran away from a bad house. She got as far as a bus station in a town she'd never seen in Maine in the middle of winter, and she ran out of money, and she sat in a diner across the street because it was warm, with no coat and no plan and no idea what was going to happen to her. And a man came in. A younger man, a schoolteacher, she always said. He sat down across from her, and he didn't lecture her, and he didn't call anybody. He just bought her supper. And then he bought her a bus ticket home, and he walked her to the store next door and bought her a winter coat. A real one, and he told her," June's voice broke here and she pushed through it. "He told her everybody deserves a way home, and then he put her on the bus and she never saw him again." I could not breathe. I want you to understand. 30-some years fell away and I was 41 years old again, and there was a frozen kid in the corner booth with no coat, and I had a little money in my pocket and a wife at home who would have skinned me if I'd walked past a child in trouble, and I did the only thing a person does. I had not thought about it in decades. It was not a thing you remember. It was just a Tuesday. My mother went home, June said. She got herself out of that house for good a year later. She put herself through school. She had me. And she told me that story my whole life. Every time things got hard, she'd say, June, there are good people in this world. I know it for a fact because one of them bought me a coat once and put me on a bus and asked for nothing. She didn't know his name. She only knew it was a diner in a little Maine town with a blue boat on the sign. The Bluebird. She looked at me. When she died, I had nobody and nothing. So I came north to find a diner with a blue boat on the sign because it was the only place in the world my mother ever called safe. I didn't come to find him. I never dreamed he'd still be sitting there. I just wanted to sit where she'd sat one time, where somebody had been kind to her. And the morning I walked in, the only open seat in the whole place was across from an old man with a blue coffee cup he never filled. So I asked if the seat was taken, and he let me sit down. The room did not make a sound. Vale was somewhere in it, and I did not care where. June wiped her face with the heel of her hand and said, I never wanted his money. I came for a chair in a diner. That's the whole truth, and I'm done. And she sat down. I will tell you that a town can change its whole mind in the space of one breath. The diner was saved that night, though it took some weeks of lawyers and signatures to make it official. It turned out that a development needs the goodwill of the town it builds in, and a development that tries to bulldoze the place where a man courted his late wife and a stranger's mother was once saved from the cold finds that goodwill is not for sale. Vale's company found a different lot. Sal kept his lease, with the clause fixed this time, and Dot framed the petition and hung it by the register, and Earl bought the first round of coffee for the whole place, and grumbled that he'd known June was all right the entire time, which was a lie, and we all let him have it. But the saving of the diner is not the end of my story, and I don't want you to think it is. The end of my story happened a few mornings later, on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that turns out not to be ordinary at all. June came in at 7:15 the way she did now. The diner wasn't full. There were open seats everywhere. She could have sat anywhere. She came to my booth and she stood there a second, and she looked at the blue mug across from me, Ruth's mug, where I had set it that morning the way I had set it every morning for 3 years. The handle turned just so. This seat taken, she asked. The same words, but softer now because we both knew the answer was the only thing that had ever mattered. And I did a thing I had not done in 3 years. I reached across the table and I picked up Ruth's blue mug, the chipped one, the one I never filled, and I held it a moment and I felt the whole 40 years of it warm in my hand. Then I waved Dot over and I asked her to fill it. Not with coffee. June didn't take coffee. With cocoa, the way a person fills a cup for somebody they want to keep. And I set it down in front of the empty chair, full and steaming, and I pushed it gently across the table to her. It is now, I said, if you'll have it. She sat down. She put both hands around that mug the way she'd held out my pills the first week, like it mattered, and her eyes were full but she was smiling, that same smile from the first gray morning, and I understood that she had walked 1,000 miles north to sit in a chair where her mother had once been safe, and had ended up making an old man's chair safe instead, and that neither one of us was going to be alone anymore. I am an old man and I have had a lot of time to think about how the pieces of a life fit together. I used to believe that what you lose is just gone, that the empty chair stays empty, that grief is a room you live in until you die. I don't believe that anymore, because 30 years ago a younger man with a wife waiting at home bought a frozen child a coat and a bus ticket and forgot all about it by supper. And he did not know, could not have known, that he was planting something. That the kindness would grow up somewhere far away, in a girl who heard the story 1,000 times, and that one cold morning it would come walking back through the door of a diner with a blue boat on the sign, and sit down across from him, and fill the chair he had given up on. Ruth would have loved her. That is the thought I have most mornings now, June across from me with her cocoa and the blue mug, the jukebox playing Ruth's song, the harbor going silver out the window my wife used to watch. Ruth would have loved her, and Ruth would have said in that way she had, that there was never any mystery to it at all. You set out kindness like you set out a cup. You don't get to know who'll come and fill it. You just trust that someday, when you've forgotten you ever did it, somebody will. The chair across from me is not empty anymore. It never will be again. And I have stopped telling people it isn't crazy that I used to talk to it, because it turns out it was the most reasonable thing I ever did. I was just keeping the seat warm. I was just waiting, all those gray mornings without knowing it, for the kindness to find its way home. She asks me sometimes what made me say nothing that first morning instead of sending her away like I'd sent everyone else. The truth is I don't know. I had the word ready. I had years of practice at it. But an old man learns eventually that the most important things he ever does will look from the outside like nothing at all. A coat, a bus ticket, a seat at a table, a cup you finally let somebody fill. Everybody deserves a way home. I said that to a stranger once and forgot it for 30 years. She came all this way to give it back to me. And every morning now, when the bell over the door rings at 7:15 and June walks in out of the cold, I think the same thing I thought the very first time, the thing I was too stubborn and too sad to say out loud back then. The seat is taken, it is now, and it always will be.